Welcome. Hello. Thank you very much for coming. It's a pleasure to see so many people here for this talk. My name is JJ Charlesworth. I'm one of the editors of ArtReview magazine. It's my pleasure to, moderate or host this artist talk with Chloe Wise in partnership with Almine Rech. So we're very pleased to be here. I hope you're excited to see this show. It's certainly quite an experience, and there's lots and lots to talk about. As you may have guessed, the person to my left is Chloe, who is an artist, who is a painter, sculptor, video maker, currently based in New York, and has made everything that you see here today. And to her left is Francesca Gavin, who is a curator, the director recently appointed of the art fair Viennacontemporary in Vienna.
It's in the name.
And also editor of Epoch magazine, which is a very interesting, relatively recently established publication. This is billed as a talk between them, but I feel a bit left out. I'm going to ask Francesca to start with a few ideas about what Chloe is doing, or what these paintings do, because I think they do a lot of things which are not always straightforward or even that easy. We'll have a conversation out of that over the next 40 minutes or so. Chloe was suggesting that me and Francesca just talk, and then she interjects if we get anything wrong. But I think that's a bad idea. I'm going to ask Francesca to bring her ideas in.
Okay, that's really interesting. Oh, maybe the little baby has something to say.
We have a question.
Early questions. I became aware of Chloe's work about 8 years ago now. So I've been seeing how it's progressed, and the things that I find interesting in it, one of the things that always comes to me is how it's unpicking our relationship to images and how we consume them and how the media forms them and how we are reflected back in what we're looking at and that whole process of viewing. I've always been really fascinated with, in particular, I'm obsessed with your video work, which is incredible, and how the paintings can be contextualized within that. And I think another one of the really interesting aspects of what you do is how you incorporate ideas of still life and art history into what is a very contemporary take on painting. So even like the painting behind us with its pile of garbage or the insertion of food or decay, I think so much of that it plays with 17th century painting's awareness of meta-painting, the idea of the painting conscious of itself as an object. And I think that you play around with that in a really interesting way. I think your work as a wider sense is really about our awareness of art, knowing it's art. Would you agree?
I absolutely agree. I think the paintings that were around today know they're paintings, and the subjects of the paintings know they are the subjects of paintings. And so I think in the wider context of art history, we're very familiar with looking at the voyeurism of the gaze, of the reclining nude, looking away, unaware that there is a gaze being kind of projected onto them. And I think I have always had the idea that my painting subjects, whether it's friends of mine or just based on people, they are aware that they're being painted, they look back at you. And I live amongst my paintings all the time, and I feel that there is a sort of a conversation between image maker, being looked at while looking at, and there's this awareness of, or there's maybe a blur between audience. As the viewer of the painting, maybe you're the audience, maybe you're the one being looked at. Perhaps the paintings are the audience themselves. And so I think that is, as we are more inundated with media and images, the images we've all grown up around, billboards, television, mass media, advertising, we're smiled at by advertisements that are intending to capture our desire and sell us something. So we're looked at and smiled at in this sort of false way, and we're used to that. And I want to replicate that in a way in order to bring up that conversation of what is looking and what is being looked at, especially in a world where we are constantly objectifying packaging and presenting ourselves. We have so much promotional, whether it's a LinkedIn or a yearbook photo or the T-shirt that you buy that has a band logo on it or a band album cover on it. There's so much image and so much selling that happens through the face. And so I think the work addresses that.
But I also think it has a lot, I mean, even the way the paintings have developed, I felt like the earlier work was more around pose. Now it's much more about like this psychological inner life, this anxiety, this kind of sense of hysteria. There's a discomfort here, like in the work. You're kind of aware that it's not, in a way that someone, let's say the difference between someone like John Curran is like playing with, in his case, class, but it's like a hysteric body. I think it says much more about contemporary ideas of the anxiety of the image.
I think about the smile and the way that a smile can have multiple meanings and is often not what it is on paper. A smile, a smiley face, or the idea of smile for the camera is such a flat first glance, but it doesn't indicate the happiness that it purports to actually indicate. How rare is it that somebody smiles and holds it because they're actually happy? And I think since a lot of painting happened before the advent of photography, of course, but painting after that, or images after photography, after there's this fourth wall that I'm currently breaking where you're like looking at a camera and smiling, there's nothing spontaneous. That becomes a pseudo event. And so painting that has smiles right away is referencing photography and the idea of breaking the spontaneous moment to pose and actually bring in the artifice into the face, to use the smiling muscles in a way that is not natural. There's no spontaneous smile that would last that long as it would be portrayed in a painting or a photo. And so for me, there's laughing out of anxiety, laughing out of discomfort. There's actually, when you think about the evolutionary biological reason for laughter, much like a yawn, it's an animalistic thing we do. We laugh and we can't help it. We can, of course, force a laugh, but laughter happens to dissipate violence sometimes and to create empathy, to kind of to define that you're part of a group. When you make a joke and I laugh, I'm signaling that I'm with you. And if there's a moment of discomfort or potential violent chaos outbreak, you can dissipate that with a smile or a laugh. And so smiling and baring teeth can have so many meanings. You can see that in some of the paintings where this mania, this hysteria, there could be fear, there could be potential violence, but a smile is so much more than a smile.
I mean, I'd also say the relationship to photography is also really interesting in a wider sense, because obviously you're working from, well, not obviously, but you are incorporating some kind of photorealistic, working from photographic references in what you do, though obviously there's some life painting here too. But I think that's quite interesting also, unpicking what our relationship with the photographic image, because and it's a very contemporary take on what a photographic image is, which is a digital one. It's and your works are very much painting, but how we consume digital imagery is very different from, let's say, analog stuff 50 years ago or even 30 years ago.
Yeah, everything is in focus in a way that maybe analog photography wouldn't have, or everything can be cropped and can be doubled and can be reproduced. I think there's a copying. The cropping, I think I use a lot of cropping. I think it refers to the way that we are so comfortable with cutting images and changing them in the palm of our hand. It becomes sort of second nature to do that kind of violence to an image, to cut the head off something or just to zoom in.
But it's not like the Foucault, sexual fragmentation of the body in the same way, where it's like, I'm just going to show you breast, which highlights your desire within it. It's weirder than that, in a way.
Well, there's some paintings in the next room where, and there's one there too, where I've created this sort of cropping where there's a certain part of the body that is potentially removable. And so this idea of, would you like the body without the mind? Or would you like the smile without the breasts? Do you want me to get rid of a nipple? Should we remove the genitalia? It's sort of this painting that's facetiously aware of itself as being portable or commodifiable. And in a way, painting knows that it can be picked up, shipped away, put on someone's wall. And so it's like, if you want to censor it, it's painting that's willing to censor itself in a facetious, sort of ironic way. But I think it definitely, the fragmentation comes up for sure. Are you feeling left out, JJ?
No, I'm feeling like I want to say things now.
Do.
I'm very interested in what you are both starting to talk about in terms of the relationship of photography to these, because we should, I guess, not forget that these are portraits. Many of them are a kind of portraiture or a kind of, somewhere in strong relationship to portraiture. But I think what you were saying, Chloe, about how advertising imagery or commercial imagery or the world of mass media imagery often is completely organized and devised to appeal to you, to the eye and to the mind in a way which is very seductive, direct, and disarming, right? So when you see a beautiful, glamorous model, the whole point of glamour in the origin of that term is a kind of fascination or magic or, but what's important, I think, with these paintings is there's a kind of disruption. And it comes back to this distinction for me between the history of painting as portraiture in painting and these paintings' relationships to photography and media imagery, which has somehow taken over from a tradition of painting. What's really, I find very interesting about looking at these in thinking in relationship to the history of the nude or the history of the portrait. Perhaps because I was at the National Portrait Gallery a couple of weeks ago in London and really overwhelmed with the amount of old paintings. But there's a kind of directness and not innocence, but a kind of relationship which is well established between the sincerity of the idea of what that portrait is supposed to be doing. It's like communicating this person's physiognomy. It has something to do with their personality or their status or whatever it is, because obviously the culture of portraits changes through history. But there's a straightness to it, of that relationship, which somehow has been taken over in the modern period by the photographic image. And what I think is intriguing here is that the paintings know that they're somehow superseded by the photographic image. And it's not that they're just renderings, that they're not worked from photographs in a way which is innocent. They also know that they're trying to cause trouble between the idea of them as some of related to photorealist painting or to photorealist painting, and then also they want to cause trouble with the idea that the human body is glamorous, right? Because obviously there is a strong thing going on here about the surface of bodies and skin and naked bodies and gloss, and shine. I think that's the thing that really struck me about this is how disturbing shine is, and I glimmer really and gloss, right? I don't know if that's, but I mean, it's also, but because it does kind of remind you that there's, something in the way, that something's being performed on you, there's a kind of technique, there's a trick that's being played.
I like what you're saying about the straightforwardness or the unambiguity of paintings in some cases in the National Portrait Gallery, for example. And I think that I do come to this with a performed ambiguity, or I do intend to create ambiguity, because I'm even faced with ambiguity. When I look at these paintings, I don't know where they're taking place. For me, it's in some sort of ether, perhaps a stage, perhaps a ceremony, or a prom, or a ritualistic sort of sacrifice. It's unclear to me, like, is this orgiastic, or is she comfortable in sleeping, or is she on latex or plastic or comfortable tool? It's unclear to me, and I love that ambiguity, or that kind of the double meaning, the potential for shine on skin to be either sweat or, the glamorous glittering Vaseline on the lens of a beautiful twinkling evening. It could either be that or the most sweat-filled, anxious moment. Is an eye tearing up with liquid because of being brought to tears by beauty, or holding back tears from fear? So for me, there is that ambiguity, and I love that you said troublemaker. I do think there's like a trickster element to some of the people that I'm portraying, and they're doing it to me too. And so I like the idea that no one's really safe, but we're not in a moment of actual chaos. I'm not depicting the moment where things actually fall apart, where chaos unfurls or society crumbles and falls apart. It's just, I want it to be that that's just outside of the frame, that the potential is latent but there, and that this is the moment where everything is being held together. And there is always, as there is being a human in society and in a world or in a body, there is this potential for things to fall out or to break. And I'm not interested in trying to solve that or trying to portray the madness of that, but I am, because in my day-to-day life, and I think we can all relate to that, we're all more caught up with the trying to keep it together part. And I think that's the relatable anxiety, and that's the relatable kind of pregnant tension that we deal with every day.
Is that what you're thinking about in terms of hysteria?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a pretty loaded.
Yeah, I mean,
term,
I think those kind of things, that kind of Freudian element is actually intentional. And I don't necessarily mean that within like the representation of women, but the hysteric, I think, is really the kind of manicness, I think, is really interesting.
But it is women, and in a way, it's aware of itself as that. Yeah. So.
I also think there's also something really fascinating about materiality here. So going back to what you're saying about the shine, I think that also, I mean, we're very aware of the fleshiness in the bodies here and the texture, but also the texture of hair, the draping of material, the draping of the background. A lot of these figures exist in a kind of draped non-space, but you're very aware of the texture of everything. Its texture is kind of important. So I think that's something kind of also really interesting. It creates a kind of tension, this kind of softness, slipperiness, which is also really exaggerated when you see the materiality in the sculptural installation of the Band-Aids, which also plays around with holding things together, literally taping your body so you don't spill out. That's actually how I refer to aging. That aging is really like you're putting a plaster on the wound and like you're spilling out the sides. So that's what I always think of. But the idea of, and the fact that you've replicated something plastic or fabric, but out of other faux materials, or there's a tactility in the paintings that also emerges in the sculpture.
Well, the material of the sculpture of the Band-Aid installation is a lot of skin-related materials. So leather, fake leather, shearling, latex, rubber, a lot of materials that I was thinking about the way that leather is, like hides are tanned before they're usable leather. And there's something really morbid and messed up when you look at that imagery. It's obviously a step in the process from cow to leather jacket. But that step is really grotesque. And I think there's something really abject when you look at the materiality of leather. Same thing with the way that food is made, the way that we consume animal products. Like, this is not a vegan sort of message I'm saying, but there is a dissociation that we have to be able to have in order to consume and eat and wear the products that we wear. And for me, it's that suspension of the reality of industrialized, landfills are being called to mind here. I'm thinking of leather and animals and all of these things, and all of the way that we're able to dissociate that and keep that at bay so that we can keep on living our lives is in itself a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Or it's, for me, it's the idea that that Band-Aids bring to mind, they imply the wound. What they do is cover the wound so that it's more sightly, so that you don't have to witness the long form, difficult process that is natural healing. But it's too abject to look at sometimes. And you don't want to see, when you see your own blood, you come face to face with your own mortality. I mean, we've all been there when you have you can't look away from a car accident, or you can't look away from, you broke your leg, and there's something so abject, but it really shows you that you're flesh and bones, And so to me, the idea that the Band-Aid is this sort of sanitized image that provides protection, but it's protection, it's like Johnson & Johnson is there for you. But really, at the same time, Johnson & Johnson is probably to blame for so much of the actual wound, for example, the forever chemicals and so on. So there's this idea that industry and corporations and capitalism are always there to sort of have your back in case you fall apart, break a leg, age, or anything else on the road to dying. But sometimes it's the actual object itself that was the support system or was the solution, the palliative solution, that in this sort of cruel optimism way can be part of the problem as well. And so for me, the idea that Band-Aids are this kind of poetic consumer product that you don't think of too much. It's like a normalized prosthetic, but it is an uncanny second skin that we use in order to look away from the actual grotesquerie of our own skin when it's wounded. And a Band-Aid can be a smile in certain situations, like we were saying before. The Band-Aid can be recycling, even though recycling is not going to change what's happening with the landfills. And most things that we recycle, frankly, don't get recycled. But we do it so that we can kind of keep on moving. And of course we should recycle. But we do it to feel better because the reality of the situation is much too profound and unthinkable, unfathomable. So we take these little palliative steps in order to get by.
There's a painting in the other upstairs gallery, which is of a hand or hands one of which is completely covered in band-aids, and it does immediately kind of make you very aware of the thing that you're mentioning around the prosthetic. So we put one band-aid on a plaster, as they call them in the UK, a sparadrap in French. That's a good word.
Is it sparadrap? That was plaster. A pansement.
A pansement, voilà. But it's like you say, to kind of restore what is the normal, the skin, the body. And then when you see this hand covered in band-aids, you're kind of thinking, well, how much damage has occurred here? And but then it's also kind of connected to the fake fingernails. And so this kind of prosthetic thing is I think important here, because there's a lot of these moments in these paintings and in relationship to the sculptures, which is, again, keeps highlighting the disjuncture between something which is whole and something which needs to be sort of propped up or supplemented, and made less, that goes towards something which has its own kind of integrity, which is a kind of cultural beauty. So when you see fingernails are not, nobody goes, wow, that's weird. Women, principally women, wear fake fingernails to do something which they think has kind of has a sincere impact that works, right? It works, it functions. And yet in your paintings, you've got these very weird moments where there are hands touching an otherwise naked body, like this one over here, where the model's or the subject's fingers, her own, are natural, yeah? But the hand which is reaching over her has got these almost claw-like extensions. So there's this very uneasy thing about the prosthetics of being a cultured person or a social person, like all this kind of, the fact that there's this principally a natural naked person, human being, and then this huge kind of like shambles of and chaos of all the things that make life actually functional, right? You can't just walk around naked. But that's kind of...
You're nailing it. You're really, yeah.
That's kind of where it's exciting in terms of this sort of dissonance with the image. And
yeah, I agree with you. And in a weird way, it reminds me of that kind of weird, twisted take on beauty you'd get in someone like Cranach. And that painting in particular, the doubling of the female figure, is very Cranach. These ideas of like, we're looking at beauty, but it's like knowing it's something a bit off. It's a bit elongated. It's a little bit uncomfortable. It's sitting on a pile of garbage. It's like, it's idealization. It's a little, it's aware of like its capitalist failure. It's aware of its ideas around value. And it kind of goes, is this really beautiful? Am I really valuable? It questions a lot of our relationship to these things. Like, is this really clean? There's a lot of imagery of cleaning products throughout your work for years, Band-Aids, but also Purell and other kind of liquid cleaning products. And I think that's really interesting because there's a dirtiness in what you do. And like, you feel uncomfortable looking at something that's supposed to be solving our failures, so capitalism. You're looking at that like objects that are supposed to soothe us, and then actually they're failing.
Exactly. You guys, yeah, thank you, yes. Okay, I'm just gonna back up for a second to the fake nails. When I first started making this show and I first started thinking about Band-Aids, I was thinking about them as a normalized prosthetic, and I was brainstorming what other normalized objects that we make part of our body in order to extend our body, become bigger, become more beautiful, more useful. And but at the same time, it's a false sort of, it's like it's a bionic almost addition to the body. So I was thinking about fake nails, contact lenses, hair extensions, even air purifiers in the car, where it's like these things that kind of like fix or produce some sort of second, like here's fake air to smell fresh. Fresh air as a fake smell is like it's like white noise. It's this funny thing. But with fake nails, I was thinking about how, it's such a fine line between beautiful and grotesque, where the idea of extending, it's like we want to be bigger and more violent, potentially more capable of picking up or scratching or pulling more flesh off more bones, or, hair extensions, like having longer hair, it's like lengthening our fur coat, But when those things are part of the body, it's all fine and well, but the second that falls off, the second a fake nail falls off on the ground, or your Band-Aid falls off in the pool, or you see a hair extension kind of showing, it's that there's something so uncanny and uncomfortable and grotesque about that. And so I think these also ask sort of, where does the body end? Like, at what point, when you add things, a Band-Aid, an eye contact, you're adding things to solve a problem, to make your body more capable, more able to weather the elements and to live longer potentially, and the second those things fall off, you're faced with this sort of failure, the body's inevitable decay, the idea that part of you falls, like when you see a Band-Aid I'm covered in Band-Aids at all points, at all times. Like when one kind of comes loose, I'm sort of like, oh God, and then when it falls off and you see, the blood that's left on the Band-Aid, it's sort of taunting. It's like, look, you leaked, and all we're trying to do is stop ourselves from leaking. And so for me, the objects become quite taunting and quite aware of themselves as like they're helping us be human, but they're also, at the same time, they're not us.
But it also reminds me of that thing when like there's an object on a shelf and it's, a luxury product, and we're aware of the luxury product, and then it goes on sale and it's like deeply reduced, and suddenly it becomes a bit undesirable. So I think it plays with that tension as well. Like, there are, like food, you see it, if it's beautiful and laid out as a way of like, eat me, or I'm so tasty. And then, but when the next day or something, you put it in a different location and it's revolting.
Or the roast chicken that comes out like a Thanksgiving is then the carcass. I mean, it's the repulsion attraction kind of binary where anything that is beautiful and attractive will then become revolting and used up. It's like the flower that wilts. It's the memento mori of it all. But I think about that with when something doesn't wilt, that's also its own kind of repulsion because it's inherently unnatural. So there's something gross about like a fake flower is so pretty from afar, and then up close you're like, oh, this is so synthetic. There's something about it. And so back to this, you were saying it's like she's kind of rolling around seemingly free and untethered from any clothing or products or items, but then right below her is this, it's like there is no moment where we're naked and where we're alone. We are always with our stuff. We are never alone. We carry this snail trail of detritus. Like, what did we consume today? The coffee cups, the plastic, the wrappers from the Band-Aids, like all of the things we carry in our bags. Like, I need Tylenol or paracetamol over here. Or like so many things, and face wash and socks, and I'm leaving so much. When you take out your trash a few times a week, you see like I'm not just a person walking in the world, I'm a person stomping through the world, contributing so much to the carbon footprint and landfills and all that, but you kind of can't think about life that way. Otherwise you'd get obsessed and you'd end up, like how would that be useful either? So it's this sort of, it's this cloud above us, around us at all times, that we are this mess make, and the further we go with innovation and technology and solutions and, the further we advance and progress, the more trash we make, the more mess we make. And so I'm not trying to, these paintings don't address global warming and they don't address these issues, but they're just outside the frame. It's the reality that there is no sort of innocent there is no rolling around outside of capitalism and consumerism. There is no free from it all. And so you can be in this seemingly this ether where you're just naked and free of it all, but like what is right outside of the frame is the mess you've made.
But if we're paying more attention to them as not necessarily portraits, but kind of reflections on what bodies must be like, and people's bodies, and how people see their own bodies, or how we think bodies are seen. At one level, it's quite obvious to me that you're curious about the art history of the history of the nude, right? So it's quite funny because I was walking around not thinking very much, and then suddenly started thinking about Kenneth Clark's book, The Nude. And it doesn't really, it's not particularly, I don't find it a very interesting book apart from the bit which I'm very unfamiliar with, which is about what he calls the Northern tradition, which is essentially Northern European nude, not Florentine, not Mediterranean, but that kind of the long necks, the pale skin, the big bellies, the very kind of long face, essentially Dutch, or physiognomy, which was of a different type to the kind of voluptuous Renaissance Italian thing. And I don't know if that's here, because I can't believe that it's not. So I'm kind of very curious about, because the other thing about that is that even when you read that book, you get a very strong sense that we're mostly habituated to that Italian look, and that kind of North European, slightly kind of gangling, taller, thinner, is not the ideal of beauty that sort of won out.
I mean, I think an interesting response to that, would be, I'm very interested in, let's say, something like Ingres or Mannerism, where you get the exaggeration of the body, this kind of impossible physiognomy. So the necks are a little bit longer, or the body's a bit more twisted. It totally and utterly is playing with that history of the nude, without a doubt. But for me, it plays more in that kind of like, we're going to be slightly impossible intentionally, in a way to make us more desirable. And at the same time, this isn't real. My body isn't quite that shape. It's not like the exact figure you're seeing. There's a little bit more here, a little bit less there. We're slightly twisted. We're turning our body in a different way. For me, it says more about the painting's ability to manipulate the image in the same way that we become used to, like, say, Photoshop or Facetune.
Or AI.
Or AI.
Which I don't want to talk about, but it comes to mind with like the sixth finger thing, with the impossible bodies, and I think about that a lot. I mean, you say Ingres, I think about that too. With that painting, I thought it was quite Mannerist as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes I take the warp tool on Photoshop and I like play a bit, and then I'm using that image to reference.
Yeah.
I mean, naturally that just comes, with your hand a bit, but at the same time, there is this thing with we're so accustomed to AI and filters and things being augmented that I think there is almost, that is actually quite real to the way that we perceive the body now. It is a manipulated body.
But maybe that's also it. Maybe your painting are changing awareness to what the body is, whereas for so many centuries, it's very rooted in the context of a time. Like 20 years ago, the bodies that you're representing wouldn't have resonated in the same way. These are contemporary bodies. This is the body of now. This is a body that's come out of Instagram pictures of girls in their underwear.
I'm not sure. I mean, maybe, yeah, I'll think about that. I think I'm just painting bodies as I see them, which that could be built in, but so is art history, and so is Baywatch, and then so is the commercial, like the billboard that I pass by, and it's also just I'm painting what's around me as well. But the impossible body that you were saying before, there's a painting back there where the body makes no sense. The second body behind her, it makes no sense. And for me, that was really freeing, and somewhere that I'd actually like to go more. To free yourself from likeness or the image that you're referencing, I think, is a direction I'm interested in, because the impossibility itself makes more possibility.
Can I ask, though, about your subjects? Because I'm kind of assuming that you have a relationship to them, which is personal, friendly, intimate, I don't know, but close. I mean, I don't know if that's a criteria for how you
Imagine I was like, no, it's people that I don't really like that much.
Well, that's right. But,
the criteria is
are they accomplices in making these?
I think they were. I think that's a really nice word, accomplices. I think they were in previous shows much more than this time. I always have painted friends of mine, and I thought it was important to sort of have this, I think, mutual kind of like the painting is made by both of us. Like, it's their consent. They have to feel super represented. And now I'm sort of over that. Okay. And I'm feeling like I really want to free myself from likeness. I don't want permission I want permission to take the photo, but once I take it, I want to be able to change features and give someone a completely different hair color. Like the painting that was the title image, Harm's Way, which is back there, she's not a redhead. For me, it was just, I want to be able to be like, I'm not representing you the way that I see you. I'm taking your image as a gift that I then go forward with. And so there's some people that are mixes of people. This is not twins, this is one person twice. And some of the people here, I'm so lucky that I have friends that will, take out their boobs for me. But at the same time, I kind of want to get away from representation of a subject, so I can paint the archetypal person in a situation, bodies in situations.
But you're getting from the material that you you're looking for, that you're heading towards?
Yeah,
in the
I
paintings?
need specificity, in a face. I could paint from my mind, but then it will look like me, which a lot of them do over and over, because that's what you end up referencing. I paint from photos, so I need to see the way that light hits the skin, the way that the shadow of the nose falls over the mouth, and so yeah, I tried to use AI for it. It didn't go well.
Okay, it's the weird thing about AI is so much more hard work.
I think it ends up making, you try to make an image, but you end up making poetry, because
Yeah.
the sentences that you end up putting together to create the image, forget the image, look at that sentence. That's a really funny proposition.
Yeah. I don't know if this is relevant, but I do wonder about whether you were talking about resonance that these might have now, Francesca, as opposed to that they might not have resonated, say, 20 years ago. And I do have to ask myself if these are paintings not made for me, or my generation, or my age, or are they paintings made for women, or are they paintings made for people who have a different relationship to images of themselves than maybe I do?
No, they're for everybody.
Well, no, that's very nice of you. But
that's a really interesting question.
It's more to do with, like, are these touching on where people are at with the image of
I mean, for example, the
the
reason
self,
why
right?
I mean, there was a video work you did at Parkour, which I told everyone I think is the best thing that was made last year.
Thank you.
It's incredible, which was a montage of kind of fake infomercials that you directed in different kind of textural ways. And I know the reason why that resonated with me as a work is because I grew up in America for when I was younger, and I totally recognized the specific atmosphere that you were tapping into. So, I mean, I would argue, and I think you'd probably agree, JJ, that whatever artwork any of us connect to is usually in some way drawing on or connecting to our own autobiographical references.
Yeah, but I'm more curious about how stressed out I feel with these, in front of these. They make me angry. I think the thing is they're not an easy ride, right? They are not paintings that are deliberately set out to seduce, nor do they balance a kind of ambiguity about, well, they could be kind of seductive, but at the same time there's a fly in the ointment kind of painting, which of which there has been, quite a tradition, or not a tradition, but a body of work by various artists, maybe in the last 20 years. But these ones don't give you stuff which is easy, so that you can take on the trickier stuff, as it were. They are quite still confrontational is not quite the right word, but they produce tension, right? And I think that's a very interesting thing to do with big paintings. It's like, okay, how does one get through it? The experience.
Well, they're
quite tough, right?
Yeah.
And the scale is important too.
Scale is fascinating because they're bigger than us.
They don't back down.
They're like these
bigger.
These people are like supersized humans. Like,
I like that you said confrontational. The idea that someone's confrontational while being really nice and polite is something that you can relate to. It's a certain kind of terror, a certain kind of anxiety when someone's through clenched, smiling teeth telling you everything is fine. For me, that is a much more recognizable and common sort of terror than the actual abject chaos. Like, you don't really come into contact in your day-to-day life with so much violence. Ideally, if you're lucky enough, I'm not going to get into it, but we do come into contact with this tension under the duress of polite society that I do think, I don't think it's an age or gendered thing. I think that we all know that feeling, but I think especially to women, and I think I've spoken to many women after seeing the show who are like, I know how that feels, and I have felt, I don't know what particular emotion is being portrayed necessarily, because I said it, I do intend for them to have dual or multiple potentials of the way that they're read. At least they do for me. But I have felt the sort of like smiling while totally being, filled with fear or anxiety. I have, maintained my composure or tried to during moments of absolute stress. I think we've all felt the feeling of trying to keep it together like the Band-Aid, and under a time of where everything in your internal world is boiling, And so I don't, just because it's women or of a certain age group, it doesn't mean that that particular emotion isn't necessarily recognizable. And actually the idea that you, as a man, feel uncomfortable maybe around it, I'm not sure the word was uncomfortable, but a certain kind of questioning, I love that. I think that's so interesting. I'm so glad that you don't walk up to it and say like, well, this is for me, oh yeah. You're like,
oh no, I don't think, I mean, it's not, I'm not kind of making that point from a position, a gendered take. I mean, I don't know
or
if,
age or
I find them quite. There's a kind of stress to the encounter of these images, these paintings, that I think I suspect most people will have. I mean, what they kind of project into that might be particular to certain kind of perspectives or positions, but I don't think that there's an easy take on these from anybody, right? And I think that the confrontational aspect of them, the fact that they are supersized, the fact that they push forwards quite hard into your kind of space, has something that doesn't run in the right direction if you were to kind of take them on board as contemplative portraits or things which are wholly affirmative of neither in terms of like traditional or classical portraiture, which integrates, the clothes and the look and the fashion and the style into something which is meant to kind of convince you of the status and the integrity of that subject and that sitter at that given moment in time when that was painted and for the culture that it was being presented to. So these are not, but these just really rip into the space that you're in with people who you're not sure whether they're, as you're kind of, outlining, you're not sure whether they're completely happy to be physically present, or that there's a serious conflict within them between how they must be thinking about. And this is the interesting thing, right? Psychologically, they're very torn, right? Because you're starting to get the sense that a subject there is not completely at ease with the image that they're making, which is a crazy thing because they're just paintings. There's nobody there, right?
I mean, that's also really interesting, like the kind of tension, even in terms of genre, between portraiture and the nude. That's actually, there's not like a giant history of nude portraits. I mean, there's like some Robert Mapplethorpe, you know what I mean? There's some examples, I mean, but like Hans Bellmer did some stuff of Una Kazern, but she's got her face chopped off and they're a little bit more risque, we'll put it that way. But like, there is also this I always think of that Helen Mirren quote, you're always going to be upstaged by your own nipples. But it's true, like the awareness of like breasts and the nipple and like the complexity of female relationships with their own bodies and the idea of a portrait in itself is filled with tension.
Mm-hmm. And there's also the humor of the nipple. Mm-hmm. It's like another set of eyes and we all have them and it's just something funny about them. I think they're so present in the work. I find nipples so funny. I don't know why.
That's very Magritte as well. I'm sorry, the Magritte.
Like, it's very that. Yeah.
You see them everywhere, right?
Nipples?
No, I'm just. If you're in the Magritte show.
I see them all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to be in Brussels and to see the Magritte show, the Magritte collection, but it's true that everything is slightly off, right? Some of these nipples look like boiled sweets. Mm-hmm. This is not right. I don't think.
I don't know. I haven't seen that many nipples.
Well, okay.
Sorry.
I was just thinking of, I don't know why I didn't think of this, because I've seen this work more than any, not to brag, but I've seen this work a lot more times than you guys have. But it's funny that it hasn't come to me before, but it reminds me of the Black Lodge in Twin Peaks and David Lynch's Twin Peaks, where, of course, I said about making this uncanny doubled fake set of twins. This isn't actually twins. There's a few instances where there's this doubling. And I was thinking about the uncanny and the evil twin and the doppelganger. And I think the Band-Aid is sort of the doppelganger of the skin. And this is sort of, this idea of this sickly duality of the twin. But then I just realized that the Black Lodge, it's like this sort of non-space. It's non-local. It's not necessarily an actual location, but maybe it's a dream space, or it's like it's just this other dimension, perhaps, where you encounter your double, and there's actually all of those. There's so much of the draping sort of red, the very Lynchian red fabric backgrounds. And I think that, I mean, I've always loved David Lynch, so maybe I'm inspired by that without thinking of it. But this makes a lot of sense to me now that it's the sort of this stage of the uncanny other. It's this ulterior or sort of other space that, whether it's performative because of which is implied by the drapery, or a dream space, or just some sort of space where you're aware that you're encountering this, you're sort of made to perform, and you're encountering this, this other. Maybe that's where we all sort of go when we're faced with having to, when you're too aware of being a person. Like, I'm sitting here talking to a room of people. Every now and then I'm like, whoa, it's kind of a lot, And then that's when, for a moment, I'm in this space with this sort of like, the show must go on sort of attitude, and I think it's possibly relatable.
Yeah, but that's also interesting in like the idea of also drapery being a stage, being about performance. These are characters performing for us in some way. We are characters performing our lives in some way. There is something about an acting of existence.
Yes.
An acting of our identities, an acting of these characters as a subject.
The self, the artifice of being a self, and of being a participant in society, and being someone who has a self to protect and present. I think there's a performativity that we're all aware of.
And art and artifice also is really interesting in the context of the still life elements as well. Like this it's not really an artichoke, it's an artificial artichoke, It's one that's showing the skill of replication as well. Like, look, I can paint an artichoke, but we're going to make it weird, that kind of thing.
I totally agree that the idea of artifice is like really loaded in every element. It strikes me this is not like, when you talk about Francesca, the nude and the portrait as a kind of hybrid genre, I think really I end up only thinking of someone like Lucian Freud, where there's an intense sort of attempt to kind of say these things go together, flesh, person, self. And this is a million miles away from that. It's at the other end of the spectrum in the sense that everything is about a kind of surface which is sort of unstably held together by one's sense of presence and what one projects, which is of course very alienating, to oneself to always think about what one looks like. I was at the Chantal Ackerman show, and there's a short video called Mirror, which is of a woman who's, in her underwear, but basically naked and looking, and it's about 5 minutes of her looking at herself in the mirror, just very kind of matter-of-factly saying, I have a small nose, my belly's a little large, and it goes on and on. There's nothing kind of tragic or dramatic about it. It's just this kind of catalogue or just accounting for what one looks like. And it's quite a striking thing, and it suddenly brings me back here, because everything's here, not just body types and skins and limbs and so on, but then their relationship to that thing, that cosmetic aspect, the shine, the earrings, even the band-aids and the nails and so on, and then again also the draping, and all of these are sort of loosely and unstably held together, and they may fall apart quite soon somehow. And that's kind of, it's that kind of weird paradox of, I don't pay too much attention to cosmetics, but occasionally you go, what does that mean? Cosmetics that are designed for a natural look.
Right. Like, I love that.
What does that mean?
Yeah, natural in quotations, capital N, natural.
I mean, natural skin look, but don't put cosmetics on them.
I love that.
So I guess we should stop and
thank
you
all so much.
all. Thank you to the gallery for hosting us, and thank you for all being such attentive and interested audience members. Thank you.